and there were no wires, no pumps, no nothing. And I'm standing there in my green hospital gown, and all of a sudden I knew that I was connected to the vast wisdom of the universe, all of it without words. It was almost as if the grains of my being were made of sand, and somebody picked me up and just threw me and scattered me across this infinite, timeless expanse.
Hi, I'm Rusty Wise, and today on the Wise News Network, we have a very special guest, Rob Gentile, which is a #1 best-selling author for his book, Quarks of Light. Rob, I really appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you for having me, Rusty. It's an honor.
Well, I read your book about 2 years ago, and then on a long flight out west last week, I listened to the audiobook, and you do an excellent job narrating the book yourself. Very professional.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
I know people pay a lot of money for people to narrate their own book, and it doesn't do as good a job as you did. So.
Oh, good. Thank you.
You know, I've got so many questions, and I know you do this a lot. I have a local connection to you in a roundabout way. Many people that you mentioned in your book, or a few, I know. Your wife, Melanie, she and I graduated together high school. I knew Frosty through his business in surveying, and also through the New Year shooters. You know, he was a chanter in the New Year shooters, and Frosty was a character. Everybody loved him.
Sure did.
And so I've grown up in Cherville all my life, so I know a lot of people. Melanie's aunt lives beside of me. So I knew a little bit about your story as far as your health issues, but I was fed bits and pieces of it. So until I really read your book, I didn't know the severity and really the behind the scenes of what all happened. And it's not just a near-death experience like your book says. There's just so many hidden gems in your book that it's like 10 books in one.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there.
Yeah,
right.
So give me a little bit about your background. I guess, you know, you're growing up and where you're from and that sort of thing.
Oh, sure. So I'm born and raised. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We're a little small town outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, by the name of Aliquippa, named after an Indian tribe. And my parents were Italian immigrants, and they immigrated here, and my father came first, my mother followed. So the biggest form of employment back then was the steel mill. So my father went into the steel mill. I'm the youngest of 4 boys. We all did time in the steel mill. I started my career in the steel mill. And my father he died in a steel mill accident when I was 5. And ironically, when I got out of high school, because it was one of the only places to work, I was in the same area as my father was when he was alive. I was like 2 departments down from where he had that accident on that fateful day. So I stayed in the steel business, and they helped provide an education for me. They transferred me to Dallas, Texas when I got out of the mill, and I started my career back in the early 80s, and I remain in the steel business today. So, but that's where it all began.
I guess I don't want to get too personal, but how did you meet Melanie?
So I'd gotten transferred to Charlotte, and Melanie had been out one night with a couple of her girlfriends. They decided after work to go to Charlotte, and it's kind of a funny story. When my mother was alive, she wanted me to tell her this story probably too many times, but because it's kind of a funny story. So believe it or not, there was, at the time, there was an ad in the paper that there were these men coming down from Alaska to look for wives. Okay, so it was on the front page of the Charlotte Observer, and as a kick, Melanie and a couple of her girlfriends said, "Hey, let's go out and we're going to go to this Harper's restaurant in Charlotte near the airport and see if we bump into any of these men from Alaska." So I had actually just gotten into town, and I had taken a break from the steel business. Actually, I was with another company, a publicly held company. It was like the 3rd largest steel company in the country, LTV Steel. that company had gone bankrupt. So I had decided to be a freelance photographer. That was my first love, photography. And I went to Nicaragua to be a stringer and cover the war there between the Contras and the Sandinistas. So when the war ended, I went broke, ran out of money. Nobody wanted to buy my pictures, of course. So I called up my old boss and I said, hey, he was with another company. I said, I'm coming home. I need a job. I said, do you have anything for me? He said, yeah, I'd love to have you back. I need a guy in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I moved to Charlotte. But before I started my job, Rusty, I had a beard and mustache, and I still had my my fatigues on, you know, from being in the jungle. And I had an old Toyota Land Cruiser, and I pull up the Harpers, and there I am, kind of an angry young man, having seen all these atrocities and all this bad stuff that went on in Central America. And I'm sitting there by myself at the bar, and there's Melanie across the bar, and all of a sudden, here she comes. And she taps me on the shoulder, and she said, are you one of those men from Alaska?
You probably look like it, though, I guess.
Did look like it. Sure, I was all grubby and beard and mustache. And at the time, you know, I wasn't familiar with a Southern accent. I couldn't understand her, and it was loud in there, you know. So I had to ask the poor girl 3-4 times, what did you say? You know, are you one of them men from Alaska? Obviously, we finally got it worked out and began talking, and the rest is history. Been married 32 years.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing around the Carolinas, and myself, some days I need an interpreter because we slur everything. We slur our R's and drag everything out. But yeah. You've probably adapted pretty well, I guess.
I did. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Like I say, I have read your book, and we can get into that a little bit. And I know at the beginning of the book you do you know, you were having some health issues and with your heart.
Yep.
And in your near-death experience, you heard from Frosty.
Yeah.
He spoke to you. Now, can you explain a little bit about that? Because I know the people in the Cherville area would especially be interested in that. Sure.
So, but my health issue was kind of a surprise. What happened to me was I had some bone spurs on my neck from earlier in my youth, sports injuries, things like that. So, you know, these spurs, they grow, they're just calcium deposits, and they start pinching nerves. So I had this nerve pain coming down my arms, and, you know, went to an army of doctors, and they said, hey, you've got these bone spurs, had some MRIs. So I didn't want to get the traditional surgery, which is they cut you in the back of your neck, and they go in and they drill these spurs out, but then they fuse your discs, you're in pain the rest of your life. So there is this famous Korean doctor. People come from all over the world to see this guy. He happens to be in Pittsburgh. And he developed this technique called a foraminal anatomy, where you can barely see the scar now, but he goes in and he cuts you on the neck, moves the esophagus aside, and he drills these spurs out. You only stay in the hospital one day, and, you know, overnight, successful surgery. So I came home, and as my transplant surgeon tells me now, what happened was, so 3 days later, in my bed at about 11:30 p.m., I threw a blood clot. And it went right into my widowmaker. So that's how it all began. So, you know, Melanie didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. I'm screaming in the bed, you know, flailing around in pain. She calls the ambulance, and they take me to Caramont, which is only like 3 miles from my house, thank goodness.
So you never had any heart issues before?
No, I hadn't. Yeah. This was a complete, you know, fluke of a thing.
Oh, wow.
So I got into the hospital. They knew, the ambulance driver knew I was having a massive heart attack. They get me into the ER. They stabilize me. This is the weird thing. So they give me some blood thinners, whatever they give you, and they put me in a room. And they tell Melanie, he's fine. We've got him stabilized. There's a nurse in there with her. We've called the cardiologist. He's not in the hospital, so we've called him in. And they said, everything is going to be fine unless this one thing happens, which they predicted it, unfortunately. So the doctor leaves the room. Melanie's in there. And all of a sudden, as I described in my book, and Melanie says it was kind of like a scene out of that movie, The Exorcist. So I had passed out from the pain, Rusty. I had passed out at my home. I don't remember the ambulance drive. I don't remember any of this. I'm laying on the gurney, and all of a sudden, I spring forward on the gurney like somebody grabbed me and just pulled me straight up from my waist up. So, bang, I spring forward. My eyes pop open, and I scream out, Frosty, which obviously my brother-in-law. I scream out Frosty's name, and I collapse backwards on the gurney. Code blue rings out through the hospital. I flatline. In rushes a team of doctors and began trying to resuscitate me. So I'll never forget it. It's a tough emotional moment. Melanie standing there, and the little Indian woman who I'm very good friends with now, Dr. Patel, who was the main doctor. Melanie turns to her before they took Melanie out of the room, and she said to Dr. Patel, we have a special needs child, and she won't make it without my husband, and I can't do this alone. You have to save him. So Melanie is taken out of the room, drops to her knees, starts to pray out loud to God to save me, and Dr. Patel starts working on me. And she did everything, her and her team. I mean, for 20 minutes, I was dead, flatlined.
Wow.
She tried all the paddle shocks, vigorous sternal rubs. 4 times she injected me straight into the heart with the epinephrine. Couldn't bring me back. But something compelled that woman not to give up on me. She kept working on me until she obtained a slight pulse. And when she obtained that pulse, Dr. Bajwa, who's also a friend now, the cardiologist, arrived, did an emergency cath through my leg, found the blockage, put 2 stents in my heart, but it was too late. I had gone into cardiogenic shock. So they put me on the vent, they intubated me, and I slipped into a 4-day coma. So that's how the night of January 26, 2016 began. And what was curious about that is, as you said, Frosty did come to me. That was my first near-death experience. I had come out of coma, and Melanie was the first one to come to my bedside, and she tells the story that there I was talking like a little child. She said I had this high-pitched voice, and as soon as she walked in the door, I said, Melanie, you have to believe me. You have to believe me. It was Frosty. He came to me. He came to me, and she got red-faced and started to cry, and she said, oh, my God, Rob, it makes total sense now. And I said, what do you mean it makes total sense? She said, right before you flatlined, you sprang forward on the gurney and you screamed out Frosty's name. So, and I don't remember any of that. And she said to me, tell me exactly what it is that Frosty said to you. And I said, Frosty said, I've made a big mess out of things. You have to go back and help clean things up. But tell my parents I'm in a good place. And Melanie said, oh, my God, that's my brother. He was always making a big mess out of things. And she said, it's just wonderful to know that he's in a good place.
Now, he had passed away not too long prior to that.
7 weeks prior.
7 weeks, yeah.
And, you know, Rusty, I don't know to this day. I've thought about this a lot, and certainly while I was writing the book, it took me 3 years to write the book, and I kept a clear vase of Frosty's ashes, partial. I didn't get all of them, but I had asked my mother-in-law for some of his ashes. So Frosty was a big inspiration in writing my book because I kept seeing those ashes and thinking about the end of life. And this comes to all of us, you know, all of our fears and all the things we worry about and all these vicissitudes and challenges we go through in life. That's how we're going to end up, pile of ashes in that jar. But I kept on, you know, asking myself and praying about it. Why did Frosty come to me? And a couple of things came to me over the years as the years have passed. It's been 7 years now as the years have gone on. You know, first thing is that I had my second and most profound near-death experience was when my heart gave out again when I was waiting for my donor heart to arrive in Chicago before I got transplanted. And if it hadn't been for Frosty to prepare me for that, because I was raised Catholic, very conservative, you know, I was kind of sort of a Christian. I was a Christian as an insurance policy. Hey, I better believe in this because if something happens, I don't want to go to hell, right? But to me, when Frosty said, tell my parents I'm in a good place, it opened up my mind and it opened up my spiritual belief system, because I was taught as a Catholic, and now they've changed the rules, which is a problem I have with organized religion. You can change the rules as you go along. But as a Catholic at that time, taking one's life was committed a mortal sin. There was no pass go, straight to hell. But when Frosty said, I'm in a good place, and my brother-in-law had an anxiety disorder. On the outside, he was very peaceful, but Frosty suffered from a lot of anxiety and a lot of struggles in this life. But there, when he came to me, he was at total peace. None of those demons were there. He was at peace. He was in a beautiful place. And I had this paradigm shift in my belief system. But so the other thing I thought about through these years is maybe because when my mother-in-law called me, I was one of the first to come down to the house. She knew that I had been in Central America. I had seen some things. So she asked me to go up into Frosty's room. Frosty was living in the upstairs bedroom of his parents' house at that time. And I had gone up into his room 7 times to try and find a journal, because Judy had asked me, you know, can you try to find a note or a journal to help us understand why he would do something like this? So I'd often wondered if, you know, in spirit, he decided to come to me because I had made that effort. And I think that's part of it. But I think the other part of it, too, is, like I say, it was Frosty that changed my belief system, and it was Frosty that prepared me spiritually for what was to come in Chicago. Wow,
that's amazing. Can you tell me, I don't want to jump the gun, but like a quark of light. Is a quark a quark? Is that correct?
It's a quark.
Okay.
Yeah.
What exactly is that? Can you explain to our viewers what a quark is?
Sure. And, you know, until I had my experience, I didn't know what a quark was. But when I was in that place, when I had my second and most profound near-death experience, when I was what I call, when that veil was lifted just enough for me to see what was going on. It wasn't heaven. It was kind of an in-between place that I call in the book the ethereal. And when my heart gave out and I was taken to that place, the first thing that happened to me is that I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere. It was as if I was in this space, and it's kind of like, the best way for me to describe it is when you're flying in an airplane. You know, you look out the window on a clear blue, what we call Carolina blue here. It's a clear blue day, and you could see everything, but you're really looking at nothing. And that's what it was like. So there I was. I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere in this infinite expanse that just went on to places that I couldn't even begin to imagine. It was just, I knew in that place it was infinite. So I'm standing in the middle of nowhere, and I can see my broken, atrophied body laying in the hospital bed. I'm about 174 now. I had atrophied down to about 132, 138. I was skeleton, green. I mean, it was an awful thing to look at. And I had this green hospital gown on, and I had that medical device called the New Pulse, which I made medical history with, you know, that was pumping my heart, trying to keep me alive. And all these IV bags, and I could see myself there. But at the same time, I'm standing in the middle of nowhere, and this hologram of a body of me, I was still in my hospital gown, but I was whole, and I was healthy. And there were no wires, no pumps, no nothing. And I'm standing there in my green hospital gown, and all of a sudden, I knew that I was connected to the vast wisdom of the universe, all of it, without words. It was almost as if the grains of my being were made of sand, and somebody picked me up and just threw me and scattered me across this infinite, timeless expanse. I felt like I was connected to everything. And I remember being in that place, disappointed that I did not see an angel or my parents that had gone on, or Jesus Christ, or anything like that. I was disappointed in that moment. But instead, I remember that God chose to show me concepts of things that I wholly understood in that moment. And it's hard to articulate this because these are things that there's no language for. But in that place, it was almost as if communication is more telepathic and synchronistic. In other words, and for me, there were no words. I didn't hear any music. The five senses had no real functionality there. In other words, I couldn't smell, hear, taste, or touch anything. But there was a spiritual presence that I felt. And all of a sudden, these concepts start to come to me, like, this is the divine place. This is the power back of all things. This is your real identity. This is your God source energy. It was like, it's hard to explain what that power was, but I knew that it was God. I knew that it was that God conscious energy. And as I stood there in the middle of nowhere, I started to feel like I was connected to everything. I was part of everything. And there was no pain in that place. None of that pain followed me into that place. I was at peace, standing there in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
And what happened is that I saw, and this is where I'm circling back to where a quark comes in. I saw and became part of this incredible interactive web that binds us all. And what it looked like is, you remember from science class what a neuron looks like. So a neuron has a nucleus, and it has these dendrites and tentacles, and they connect, just like a solar system or your brain or anything else. And as I saw this gigantic web, it was this web of twinkling lights that seemed to just extend into infinity. And I realized that this nucleus inside this quark, it was placed on my spirit, that this quark, which was this spark of light, this flash of light that was in the center of each nucleus, represented a life. And everything was intertwined and woven together. And I knew in that place that we're all connected. We're all one. And we all come from the same place. And I thought, standing there, as I became part of this web, and there were some darker parts of the web, and some of the parts of the web were brighter than others, and I came to understand that later. But here, when I was in that place, I realized that if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I loved, that light was spread, illuminating the path for others. And so when I started to research my book, after I came out of that experience, got transplanted, and I began to understand, because it was placed on me, on my spirit in that place, this is a quark, this is a quark. And I began to research quarks. And as it turns out, a quark, as far as we know now, and we're discovering new things all the time, you know, with the James Webb Telescope and all the mysteries in the world.
Yeah.
But a quark is the smallest building block of matter. And a quark is made of light. We're made of light. Everything is made of light. And it occurred to me then that God uses light to create, heal, and transform us. And
now, is light like electricity, or is it, you know, we run off electricity, or,
right.
or, you know, I'm in the electrical business also, so I know about electrons, movement of electrons.
Right,
so,
right.
And back to talking about humans, we try to make decisions on our five senses.
That's right.
And once we get away from the five senses, we really don't know. We try to be rational on our five senses,
right.
But I think the sixth sense, and I think you know this, is a spiritual sense,
yeah.
which is your sixth sense. And
that's right.
People have it, they just don't know they have it.
Well, a lot of people don't know they have it. And, you know, I think that the way we've become so sophisticated now, technology, everything that we're bombarded with, you know, we don't connect anymore with nature. We don't connect with things the way we used to. When I was a kid, I couldn't wait to go outside and go in the woods and build a dam and play with frogs and, you know, connect with the earth and connect with God's creations and all the things around us. Now, you just watch a video and you're just bombarded now, you know, emails, and particularly at work, you know, everybody wants an answer right now. We're just bombarded with the vicissitudes of life to the point where we don't even remember who we are. And the light that I'm talking about, Rusty, is that spiritual light. That light, God's light, that animates all life. That's what it is. We're spiritual beings first, having a human experience. That's what I gained from this. I also gained that when I was in that place, connected to this web, I realized that I was not my body, my race, my religion. It was a message of unity and oneness. We're all one. And I knew in that place that this light, which is what God is, irreproachable light and energy, this light that God is what connects us all and binds us all. And it's the same formula. And then when I was in that place, I said, oh, how simple. This is how the Creator must have designed it. It's only us that have made it so complicated. Because light uses the same recipe, okay? These quarks combine to create infinite possibilities in the universe. They could become a blade of grass, a person, a dog, or this table. It's all the same.
Yeah, without light, we can't survive.
Can't survive.
And I found it interesting. I saw somewhere where plants and trees are connected. They're thinking with their roots and infrastructure. Like the forest is one gigantic microorganism in itself.
It is. It's how trees communicate. They talk.
Well, they're starting to find that out.
Right.
And you know, I think as technology progresses, I think one day we'll say, this is what it's all about.
Absolutely.
I mean, we try to make things too hard sometimes, but back to our senses. You know, if we can't touch it, feel it, smell it, taste it, we don't believe it.
That's it. And that's what I was shown in that place, what I call the ethereal, during my second near-death experience. Those revelations that came to me that said, we're all connected, we're all one, we're all made of the same stuff, we all come from the same place. And, you know, it begs the question, so what the heck are we fighting about all the time? You know, the world is in worse shape than it's ever been. But why does it have to be that way? When, you know, there's a sense of oneness and power in that source of God's love and light. And I realized that that's what it is. It's this love and light of our Creator that we're all connected to and we're all part of. So why can't we get along?
Well, I think a lot of, you know, religions and the systematic type of religions by the rules.
By the rules.
You know, every religion group has a rule sheet, so to speak.
That's it.
And it really shouldn't be that way, but that's just the way it's kind of like an organization. They have certain rules.
That's it.
And I guess maybe religion has become too commercialized, I guess you could say.
Like anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got to get back to this sense of who we are. I think that, you know, we've forgotten who we are, because one of those spiritual principles that was placed on me when I was there was, this is your real identity. When we realize that God, divine intelligence, is our real identity, we can accomplish almost anything. It's like, wow, that's freedom to me. You know, I'm part of this, of course. We're created from the same source. So we have this ability to do what we want with our lives, in a sense. And it's whether I call it HT, home training, or environment, or whatever circumstances that we are raised with and grow up in, whether it's poverty or wealth or whatever it is, that sometimes limits us. But my experience just opened me up to all of these possibilities of who we are and what it is that we can be, and it was a beautiful thing.
Yes, it's like there's a lot of theories, you know, only you could have a bad day. You know, your external forces cannot make you have a bad day. In your mind, you can have a bad day, but the only person that can really decide if you're going to have a bad day is yourself.
Yeah.
So, very interesting. I know that as we go deeper into the book, you wound up having a transplant, found that, and if you want to go that route now and kind of explain that, and we can touch base on a little bit of the heart and maybe some attributes that you have now that you used to not have. I don't, you know, I hear transplant patients say that now they like peanut butter. They used to not like peanut butter. They like chocolate. They used to not like chocolate. So well, explain. You had a heart transplant and go into that.
I did. So on June 6, 2016, after 6 months, I was finally transplanted. And the way transplant works is you have to wait a year, if you even want to, connect with the transplant family, the donor family, to find out who it was. You have to wait a year. You have to write a letter in your own handwriting, and you send it to your we all have transplant coordinators, us to get transplanted, and that person sends it to the donor agency. So there are agencies all over the country, a lot of people don't know this, that harvest the organs. And then, of course, they partner with certain hospitals. So they send it to that transplant organization, and then they have the responsibility of taking that letter, because they're the only ones that know, and then sending it to that family and giving them the opportunity to communicate. So
now you waited a year to get the transplant, correct?
No, 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
And you were on the thumper.
I was on New Pulse. Yeah, the thumper.
Which you were the first patient. You were a trial.
I was.
Were you the first one?
I was the clinical trial. No, I was the second one. So the first one, the first gentleman that had it, he was going to die like the next day. So they put it in him. He agreed to have it done. They put it in him, and his heart came like 48 hours later.
Okay.
But they needed 3 weeks of data to take it to the FDA to say, hey, can we proceed with human trials? So I was the first real guinea pig of getting the New Pulse, and it's an incredible device, which they've made a lot of changes now, and they've even made more improvements, which is so cool. And I was just there last month. They make the device actually in Raleigh.
Oh, wow.
So I went to see them because they asked me to come and tell my story to the team, that all the engineers, because nobody really does that. You know, you're sitting in a cubicle, you're working on this thing for years and years, but you never see the result.
Yeah, you don't see the...
So I went, and it was an extraordinary day. You know, I told my story to the team, and it was a beautiful experience. They were also grateful to see, you know, I told them, you saved my life, my wife's life, my daughter. So the work you're doing is incredible, incredible work. But so that device, they slit you here, small cut, and they fish this little balloon pump down through your aorta. And then out the left side of my body was a titanium disc with a little rod in it, and wires came out of that attached to this little pump about that big. It's called a counterpulsation device, which ran off an iPad.
Okay.
To keep my heart pumping. Pump my heart for me.
Well, astronauts are using iPads now, so yeah.
So, but the first one was a little bit clunky and noisy. So every time it beat my heart, you know, it's like a clink, you know. But that's why Melanie named it Thumper, because every time it thumped, she said, "I like that sound. It's keeping you alive." So, but anyway, so yeah, after I got transplanted, I wrote my first letter after a year.
One thing about the charitable area, we like nicknames.
Oh, I know that, right?
Everybody has a nickname.
Everybody has a nickname. Frosty.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Well, my middle name's Russ. Everybody calls me Rusty, but around here, everybody has a nickname.
Yeah.
So Melanie she named it a nickname.
She named it a nickname. Yeah. It's a little bit different up north where I'm from. I mean, you don't see that as much, but down here, like you say, it's everybody.
Yeah.
Just kind of neat. So after a year, I wrote the letter. No response. So I was getting anxious because, as you say, I started to have feelings and emotions and cravings and all these different things that were not my own. So I was dying to know, who this person was. So I wrote another letter and then another letter, and I still didn't get a response. So it was about 2.5 years passed, and I wasn't giving up. So I finally called the, it's called Gift of Hope. That was the transplant organization in Chicago that got me my heart. And I connected with this wonderful woman, a patient advocate, and she said, Rob, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to look at your file and see what I can do. So she did. And as it turns out, the father of my donor heart had called. He got my letters, but it turns out he's doesn't like to write letters, doesn't know how to use a computer, but he wanted to know more about me because I just wouldn't give up trying to find out who this person was. So she said, hey, since he's reached out to us, I'm going to break protocol and I'm going to call him and ask him if I can give him your cell phone number and maybe you two can have a meeting. And that's what she did. So, you know, Rusty, I was just dying to try to find out who this person was living inside me, because what happened was when I got transplanted, there's this mysterious guy, this doctor called Dr. O. His last name is so long, even the nurses can't pronounce it. So everybody at the hospital calls him Dr. O. He's the guy that goes out in the middle of the night with the box and brings the hearts back. So after I got transplanted, Dr. O would come into my room, and I'm laying there, and this heart is pounding so hard that I'm literally, I feel like I'm having to hold on to the rails of the bed, because every time it pumps, I feel like I'm going to get knocked out of the bed, right? So I said, Dr. O, what did you guys put in me? And he was a real character, you know, straight face, dry sense of humor. And he said to me, we put a Jaguar heart in you, kid. And he winked, walk out of the room, you know. I was so naive, I'm telling the nurse, give me my cell phone. I want to see if it put Jaguar heart in humans. Is it possible, you know? But he would never tell me. So anyway, long story short is I finally met the dad of my donor heart. And all along I thought it was, you know, some big, strong, athletic guy. And here it turns out, for those who want to read the book, little spoiler alert, but it ended up being a beautiful 20-year-old, blue-eyed, blonde-haired girl named Molly that I have living inside me. And yes, Melanie will tell you, I tend to drive in the middle of the road now. I have on and off cravings for M&Ms, and I don't like candy. So there's a lot of things that changed. But most importantly, it was really Molly kind of spiritually driving me to find out more about her and write the book and find out really how this all works, how this heart communicates with the brain. And as I was researching my book, I found fascinating information that they've just now discovered since I've been transplanted, which is what makes transplantation work is, and this is spiritual too, you know, it's all tied in. The heart, as it turns out, has a brain.
Yeah, I read that in your book, and that just blew me away.
Oh,
I mean, I thought the brain controlled everything.
No,
it has like its own brain, its own. I mean, it thinks for itself. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Well, it does in a sense, because here's what happens. So, of course, the heart is the first thing that develops in a mother's womb, because it's the heart that's responsible for pumping the blood and oxygen and nutrients to the rest of the body so it can grow. So it's the heart that communicates with the brain first, giving it the nutrients and oxygen and everything it needs to develop. Okay? So this relationship between the heart and the brain starts very early. And it communicates with the brain in 4 ways. It communicates biochemically. It communicates through neurons, neurologically. It communicates through pulse waves, which is hormone production. And then my favorite is it communicates through electromagnetic waves, much like a wireless radio does.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Built-in Wi-Fi.
It's a built-in Wi-Fi. Great way to put it. So think of the brain as a landline and the heart as the Wi-Fi. So what they've discovered is that the heart emits a field around us that they can now measure that is more than 100 feet in diameter. And in some studies, it even goes out further. So and we all experience this. So when somebody walks into a room and you say, I feel that person's energy. It's the heart communicating.
So you actually are in reality.
Yeah, you're communicating.
Wow.
We all communicate with one another silently through this electromagnetic field being generated by the heart, which communicates with the brain. It's how we communicate. You've heard of horse whisperers, and it's how we communicate with animals. It's how we communicate with another human being without language.
So that might be some of our issues with technology. We've become so isolated that we're not around enough people enough.
That's right. You've spot on. That's exactly right. So this is why, now we're in a world where we're more connected than ever through the internet.
But we're more disconnected.
We're more disconnected, and we're lonelier than ever. And we're angrier than ever because we're socially disconnected that way. Human beings need that social intercourse, and we're not getting it, and we're not getting that spiritual connection because it's coming from the heart, not the brain. So, when I learned this and I understood how this electromagnetic frequency begins to communicate with the world around us, this is where intuition comes from. This is where gut feeling comes from. All of those things are coming from the heart.
Like when an animal does it like a person or a dog,
That's it.
They can sense people. If your dog doesn't like them, you probably
that's what it is.
Need to either. Yeah,
You're not going to either, right?
Yeah,
but that's not coming from the brain. There's nobody that can read thoughts. Where's it coming from?
Yeah.
Coming from the heart.
Makes perfect sense.
So, and they're just learning more about us. So they found these, I should have brought it with me, that they found this cluster of cells now that they've identified as the brain in the heart. So when you cut somebody's heart out of their chest like mine, throw it in a garbage can, put somebody else's in there, that's the only reason why this works, because all those other systems that I talked about, your fight or flight, your sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system is cut out. Your hormone production doesn't know what to do. It's lost. So the heart, having a brain, figures out new pathways to connect here to make all this work.
That's amazing. Well, it makes sense if you think about it. Just intuition, negativity in a room, or positive energy in a room, and just, social. I mean, you can read somebody a lot by their body language and just by being around them, more so than their language.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. So all of these silent messages that, we miss out when we're sending an email or a text.
Yeah, text. I mean, it's just numbers, on and off switches.
Yeah. So this is why, I say that when we lead with the heart, and I mean, when I say lead with the heart, I mean lead in the sense of being open to these things and being sensitive to them and understanding how it is that we communicate, where our intuition comes from. There's throughout history, I don't care if it's the Bible or whatever religious text you're reading, or all the great poets and artists, everybody, it's all about the heart. It's the heart, it's the heart, it's the heart. Mm-hmm. So, and that's why, it's not just another organ. I've talked to kidney transplants and liver transplants and people that have had a lot of different things. And, there's no connection to the donor whatsoever. It's just an organ.
But, in your book, I noticed a lot of your doctors were very spiritual.
Yes.
And a lot of people look at a doctor as just a robot. It's just a guy doing his job, or a lady doing her job or whatever.
Right.
But I think doctors are more spiritual than people give them credit, I think. And a lot of times they don't talk about it, I don't think.
You know why, Rusty? They don't have time. Now these doctors are just, they've got to see everybody every 15 minutes, and I know they want to talk about it. I'm not saying all doctors are spiritual, but most of them have this sense of spirituality that they definitely, and that's why they're in that field, So in the first place, you take the Hippocratic Oath and you're there because you want to help people. And, you know, I think there's a sense of spirituality in most of them, but they don't have time to develop it in their practice. But, and, you know, I got to tell you, I think that's what made my journey so extraordinary too, part of my journey, because I was blessed with having, from the 3 doctors who I'm friends with now that saved my life at Caramont, to my heart transplant doctors and everyone along the way, had this sense of spirituality. And that's why I talk about it in my chapter, All One. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because it lent credibility to when I was in the ethereal and I saw how all things were one. You know, I've had everything from everybody from a Christian to a Muslim to a Sikh to a Jew to a Hindu, every world religion. I've had a doctor from there. And I see that common thread that runs through all of their belief systems, which is love. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's why I say that I was blessed on this journey to have the doctors that I did, because they taught me that.
Well, one of my favorite movies is Interstellar. I don't know if you've watched it.
I haven't.
It's about love, and it's about time travel, and it's pretty interesting. It's I like the movie. Some people may like it, you may not like it, but this it's pretty interesting.
I'll check it out.
Yeah, it's called Interstellar. It came out a couple years ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll have to look at it.
Yeah, it's about how love connects things that normally people don't realize, you know. So pretty interesting.
I'll have to check it out. Yeah.
I know Ann, my wife, you know, one thing that stood out in your book was there's no coincidences.
Yes.
And that everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
And so just touch on that a little bit, because I know I laugh and I say, yeah, it's in the program, but, you know, just because we're in the computer age. But it seems like sometimes things just happen too weirdly, I guess you could say, or it's just too convenient or too coincidental. But do you think it's a program or other thoughts? Or I guess we're so connected that whether it be in prayer or thought, you can actually make things happen.
Well, and I'll tell you, this is a sticky subject, because, and I love to talk about it, so we can run down that rabbit hole.
Well, I'm just saying, I just know sometimes I feel like I'm put in positions that's coincidental a lot of times, and I don't think it's coincidental.
It's not. I think that it's multifaceted, this answer. First of all, I mentioned there were dark parts of the web, and you know, when I was there in that ethereal space and I saw those dark parts of the web, I mean, there I was, you know, connected to everything and bright and brilliant and spreading love and light. And I said, what are those dark parts? That's got to be evil. And then I came to understand that it wasn't evil. It was where human beings were not being everything they were created to be. And what do I mean by that? You know, unfortunately, and I touched on it a little bit, whether it's circumstances or being raised in a bad environment or whatever the circumstances are in one's life that stops them from being everything that they're created to be, because I think we all can. But, so circumstances, the vicissitudes of life, things that drag us into the darkness like alcohol, drug addictions, gambling addictions, whatever those abuse, whatever those things are that kind of like dim our spirit and dim our light, they don't allow us to become everything that we're created to be. And this plays into coincidences, I believe, because what I realized is that this web that I saw is kind of like a mirror. It's kind of like a reflection of what's happening here and what's happening in spirit. We're spiritual beings first, having a human experience. But what we do here matters. And when we do the right thing, and when we approach things and lead with the heart, and lead with good intentions, I believe that it reflects our spiritual life. Okay? So as we become brighter and more evolved, these so-called coincidences, they tend to connect more in our lives. In other words, I coined the phrase in my book that coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. And I really believe that, because I believe that when we're on the right path, when we know what our purpose is and we're trying to live it and we're doing the right things, that is when I think these so-called coincidences, which aren't, begin to connect more frequently than other times. So, you know, when you see that, right? When you, like, someone who understands their purpose, and I think that's why we have a tendency to worship, you know, the great athletes and musicians and all these people. They understand their purpose and they don't let anything get in the way of it. So they keep running towards that goal. And believe me, they have, you know, a lot of roadblocks and they have a lot of letdowns and they fail a million times, but they know it's their purpose and they keep going. And so these coincidences show up. They get the right coach, or they get the right musician in their band, or whatever happens. And this is just my personal belief based on my experience. I believe that that's how those coincidences kind of line up in our lives.
And I guess there's bad coincidences like tragedy, just like your heart donor, you know, but
yep,
that tragedy has blessed you, and
right,
so, and I know that's always been a struggle with death and tragedy, and with whoever, kids or whatever. You know, why does that happen? And I don't know if there's ever a good answer for that, but
yeah.
But I think by reading your book, you know, we're just here in earthly bodies, that this is not all of us. This is just an organic body that we just happen to use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think you're right, because I get asked that a lot on podcasts. Well, you know, what about my wife that got killed in the car crash? Or look at my own life. I mean, my daughter Maria, having Rett syndrome, you know, severely handicapped, can't walk, talk, feed herself her whole life. Terribly tragic. You know, it's something that you have to try to get your head around spiritually and understand, like you said, that it's not the end. We're having this human experience, and what are we learning from it? And curiously, this is why I created and wrote that chapter in the book entitled Gifts of Adversity, because shamefully, I used to see Maria as a burden on my life, and I mean, these are very difficult things to talk about. It's taken me a long time to talk about them. But
yeah, the dream had me scared there at one time.
Well, exactly, right? So,
yeah.
And there were times when, you know, I wanted to do that.
Out in California, yeah.
Yeah, shamefully so. But then I came to realize that it's Maria that's really the hero of the story, because it's Maria through all of these struggles that has kept me anchored, that has kept me working on my spiritual life and, you know, chipping away at me like a big old iceberg and trying to find, you know, the real person under there. She's the one that convinced me that God exists. So you can look at these tragedies and you can look at these things in life, and it depends on what perspective you put them in. To this day, hey, she's still Maria. She's still a suffering child who we hope every day that there's something that can help her improve her life. So believe me when I tell you, we still have our struggles financially, spiritually. You know, it's torture to watch her, and we want to see her out there playing with other kids and living a normal life. But yet, when you put it in perspective and you say, well, why not me? People say, why me? Well, why not me? Because, you know, ultimately, nobody knows the end and nobody knows God's plan. I've seen too many times, you know, a young person get cancer and people pray and pray and pray for a cure. And I watch families go down the drain, almost losing everything. And then God takes them. Right. Mm-hmm. And then what a blessing. And then they get these spiritual promptings from this child, much like I did Frosty and and other people in my life that help us, through this corporal life, and until we figure out and grow spiritually and not be afraid of death. It's just it's just one door closes and another one opens.
Yeah. Well, with our technology and we're learning every day, I still think, we're 0.5% on how much knowledge is out there.
Oh.
I mean, we just scratched the surface.
If that.
Yeah. I mean, they say the brain and is so more powerful. We only use a very small part of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And look at all the new worlds and galaxies that the James Webb Telescope is finding out, because it's out there, I think 1 million miles. I forget how many millions of miles in space. It's discovering all these new worlds every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
We used to think the world was flat.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, we try to explain, again, with our senses, and a lot of religions try to explain it exactly how heaven is, right? It's going to be exactly this way, and nobody really knows.
No, they don't.
I mean,
they don't.
And, one day we may all figure it out. I mean, we're all going to figure out what death's all about, because we're going to experience it, whether we like it or not.
That's right.
So, but your book has really inspired me, and I know it will the readers or listeners. And, it's very well worth the purchase. It really is.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Well, you look healthy now.
Yeah.
I mean, you feel good.
Yeah. Feel good, and I'm healthy, and yeah.
Well, how can people find your book, get your book, explain your book here a little bit, and I'll show it to the viewers?
So it's available on Amazon. You can order it on Amazon. That's the easiest and fastest way. But all booksellers carry it now. The audio version, the hardback, the paperback. But again, Amazon is the easiest way to order it.
Yeah, and I saw #1 bestseller.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I know you've helped thousands of people. I know you have. And so your love for what you're doing, and just for everyone around you, I commend you for that.
Thank you so much.
Well, viewers, that's it on today's Wise Wednesday. I'm Rusty Wise with the Wise News Network, and we've had such a great time with Rob Gentile, and an extraordinary story. So if you get a chance, get his book, watch our segment here. I've learned a lot. We've just scratched the surface of what his book touches on. So guys, till next time, have a great day.
Thank you, Rusty. Enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.